I'm so glad I voted already back on Thursday, Greg. Thank you. Inquiring minds want to know, though, will the weather impact voter turnout? And could rain give one of the parties an advantage? For some of the insight, we turn to Mike Binder. He's an associate professor of political science and public administration at the University of North Florida. He joins us now. Good morning, Mike.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
So let's start with weather and election day, of course. Greg just talked about the forecast. Is there really any solid evidence that bad weather means bad voter turnout?
I wouldn't say bad voter turnout, but certainly there's a lot of evidence that suggests when you get rain, you certainly can have a drop in turnout up to a percentage point of turnout drop when you get maybe an inch of rain, say. And I think that adds to just the additional costs that voters have when it shows up and going to the polls.
So what about studies that claim rain actually gives Republicans an edge in an election?
Well, again, it's about who these voters are and who's affected. So typically speaking, the most committed voters are the ones who are going to show up and overcome the costs of voting, be it driving to the polls or fighting through the rain to get there. Typically speaking, due to socioeconomic reasons, there tend to be more folks in the Democratic Party that are more marginal voters. But geographically, we can see very different trends. So, for example, here in Florida, we had the hurricane that came through the Panhandle. That part of the state is heavily Republican. So those folks are going to have a little more difficulty getting to the polls. And we've seen that with early voting in Florida. Their numbers are down. But other states where it might be a more even mix. So, for example, in Ohio, it looks like Tuesday they might get some weather. They have a very competitive governor's race and even a Senate race. And if one party is less excited than the other, that could certainly impact the outcome in a close race.
Let's get specific now. I understand that previous research suggests that 1 inch of rain can actually reduce turnout by 1%. Tell us about that.
Right. So think about it this way. If you're thinking about going to vote and you haven't voted already, and you're sitting inside your house, or maybe you're on your way home from work and you're staring at the process of parking in a parking lot, walking across the parking lot, blinding rain coming down, that's not particularly appealing. So you're less likely to do it. There is something to consider, though. Where you are, if you're in Portland or Seattle that's used to a little bit of mist, a little bit of rain, it's part of your routine. It's not a big deal. But if you're down in Arizona or Southern California and you get some rain, it's certainly going to disincentivize you from going to the polls.
Mike, I don't think we'll have too many problems with snow, at least not this year, but talk about snow and voter turnout with that as well.
Again, typically you're not going to be seeing snow here in Florida or Washington, D.C. in November. But in the northern parts, right, maybe in North Dakota or Minnesota or even in Wisconsin, if there's a little bit of snow, areas like that, they're used to it. It's part of the routine. It's not a big deal. Mm-hmm. But if you were to get 6, 8, 10, 12 inches, especially parts of rural areas where you have to drive 5, 6, 7, 10 miles maybe to the polls and the roads aren't plowed, it becomes much more difficult. It's a big impediment, and it certainly reduces the likelihood of you showing up. And that could impact an election if it's a very close one.
I have to say, Mike, it was nice having the luxury of checking the forecast for advanced voting this past week, especially with the weather not being so good on Tuesday for so many areas. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. We really appreciate it, and we urge everyone to get out there and exercise that right to vote.